Okay, I hope you can all hear me. If you have any problems, use the chat. Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to our webinar series offered by the Balkan Med Innova Project Web School. My name is Alexandros Galanidis. I'm an environmentalist with a PhD in ecology. I'm working as a researcher at the University of the Aegean in Greece, and I'm also an adult educator in environment issues. The presentation, today's webinar is entitled Historical Perspective of Energy Use. And if you are all set, I will start with the outline of the webinar. The presentation is a historical outlook of energy evolution, and it is divided in 3 sections. In the first 2 sections, I will try to point out to you the major milestones in the history of energy used by humans from the prehistorical times to the current days, to today. So I will talk about the main energy economy types of human societies, economy types concerning energy, the organic and the fossil fuel energy economy. In the third section, the last one, I will discuss with you a very important term in energy science, regardless of the scientific background or interests one comes from, which is energy transition. I will try to explain what an energy transition is, how do energy transitions occur, why sometimes are inevitable, and how they affect several aspects of our lives. So allow me to start with some generalities about energy. Energy in science is defined as the ability, the capacity of a system to do work. In other words, it is the potential of an organized group of interacting and interrelated things to cause changes. So energy is a change. I suppose you all agree that energy is the most central element for life on this planet. Of course, besides the natural environment, it is vital for the survival, the reproduction, and the evolution of human species and societies. Everything we see around us, everything we eat, we touch or feel needs energy. And since energy cannot be destroyed, but only transformed from one form to another, all things, all movements, all actions, all functions are actually transformations of energy. During this process of energy transformation, for example, from radiant energy of the sun to chemical energy captured in the plants, or from chemical energy of nice ice cream to kinetic energy for a bicycle ride, we can harness, we can exploit only a part of it for our own use. I will also challenge another consensus here with the statement that the sun is the ultimate source of energy, not only on Earth, but everywhere in our solar system. Most energy sources on our planet derive initially from the sun, with exceptions of nuclear, geothermal, and tidal energy. All energy sources are in their own way present or past transformation of solar radiation, of solar energy. For example, wood, biomass, what we call in general biofuels. These are contemporary concentrated solar energy captured by the plants through the function of photosynthesis. You know that plants use sunlight and carbon dioxide to produce sugars. So plants can transform solar radiation to chemical energy. This function, photosynthesis, is occurring day to day, but the outcome we see in the form of plant leaves, plant stems, barks, etc., could be months, years, decades, or in some special cases, centuries old. Another source that photosynthesis is giving us, but this time a very older one than biomass, is coal, oil, and natural gas, the so-called fossil fuels. These are also products of the transformation of solar energy to chemical one. But this time the transformation happened millions of years ago, and through different and very complex procedures. A third energy source that derives initially from the sun is wind power. Another example. What is wind? Wind is air in motion. Okay, the surface of the Earth is not uniform, but rather it is made of various land and water formations. Due to these differences, Earth absorbs the sun's radiations unevenly, and this uneven heating of the surface of the Earth is causing air movements that we can harness for our own energy needs. Finally, hydropower, the water power, is power energy derived from falling or fast-running water. It is the sun again that it is involved, the sun that initially evaporates and lifts water from water bodies, from rivers, from lakes, from the sea, and that lifted water falls on Earth again as rain or as snow, and form rivers that humans can dam, humans can direct or channel to create hydropower. Okay, the sun is the ultimate source of energy. This is a first early take-home message from this webinar. Directly or indirectly, almost all organisms rely inevitably on solar energy for their survival and maintenance. Another take-home message is the central importance of photosynthesis. Life on this planet, life on Earth, would be impossible without the photosynthetic conversion of solar energy into plant biomass. Solar radiation, you can see here in this figure, solar radiation hits the Earth, and plants, the producers, are capturing this energy in their leaves, transform it to chemical bonds in their organs, and then this chemical energy is transferred to the next trophic level, the level of consumers. In there, in the level of consumers, the first-class consumers, the phytophagous animals, the herbivores, are consuming the plants. The second-class consumers, the sarcophagous animals, the predators, are eating the phytophagous. And finally, a third-class consumer type, the decomposers, use the energy that is stored in dead plant and animal tissues, recycling the nutrients back into the ecosystem. As I mentioned already, we humans are not an exception on our dependence from the energy of the sun. Every one of us, each human individual in our short history, was equally dependent on energy for fulfilling our needs. However, the usage of energy is not exclusively a physical phenomenon. Each human society has been evolved in parallel with a unique energy system, with a specific energy system that characterizes it. And this energy system, in most cases, formed distinct energy economies. And as human societies were evolving through time, their energy economies were also changing. So several of the previous main societal changes have also been, in their own way, energy revolutions. Okay, now let's see some of these energy revolutions moving to the main part of the webinar. We will start this journey with the first section about the organic energy economy. What is an organic energy economy? In general, it is an energy system with limited abilities relying solely on photosynthesis. Okay, we are many million years before the industrial revolutions, and all energy flows were exclusively dependent on solar radiations. So we are talking about a solar-based energy economy. Organic energy economies were also relying on landscape alteration. Intensive land use was the main tool for the transformation of biomass into movement, into heat, or into food. In this way, organic energy economies were highly dependent on the physical limits of their surroundings. They were dependent on the capacity of the environment to naturally convert solar energy into useful goods and services. The rate of photosynthesis was extremely important, and in this way, temperature, humidity, and ecosystems stability and regeneration were crucial for these economies. Organic energy economies were, as you can imagine, the first attempt of mankind to quest new energy resources. Were they successful? Were these attempts successful? In a way, yes, they were. Despite their limits, organic energy economies established a rather fitting energy system that managed to support people and societies for millions of years. These societies, the societies of the organic energy economy, were primarily agricultural, meaning they were low energy demanding societies. They were also self-sufficient, meaning that they did not require any externalities in order to survive. They could produce everything they need on their own. And finally, they had simple energy demands. I say again, movement, heating, and feeding. The organic energy economies are the longest periods in human history, and they are divided in three periods or in three epochs: the epoch of food, the epoch of fire, and the epoch of agriculture. And we are about to see one by one of these epochs in the next slides. Let's begin with the first epoch, the epoch of food, which is by far the longest in our history and in organic energy economy histories. It lasted for about 90% of human history. It is the epoch of somatic energy, meaning the epoch where all energy humans needed came from their own bodies. How was that happening? Early humans of that period were, as you know, hunters and gatherers. They were eating primarily plants and some meat sometimes. And as it is still happening, the organic matter of all the roots or the fruits, the fish or the animals they were consuming was metabolized in their bodies, giving them the necessary calories to survive, to grow, and to reproduce. So these calories were the only source of energy that early humans could harness. Their food was converted to muscles, and these muscles helped them to move. The biomass they were consuming contained in calories that was hitting their bodies. In this way, the main characteristics of the epoch of food in the organic energy economies are these two. The basis of the energy system, the primary energy source was biomass. Okay, and while the primary energy motor that processed this energy that biomass captured were humans and their muscles. The second epoch is the epoch of fire. Fire is a very important milestone in the history of human species, perhaps the most important invention of human technology. And another quite impressive thing is that the so-called discovery of fire seems to happen more or less at the same time for different groups of humans, for independent human populations in several isolated parts of the world about 8,000 years ago. The epoch of fire can be seen also as the first main shift in energy systems. A new energy source was introduced, a source that is not derived from the human body, but for the first time it is an external one. Food and biomass are still in use, but now we have an additional extra somatic energy source, which is the heat created by fire. Energy shifts, energy revolutions are or can provoke social or cultural changes. This epoch, the mastery of fire, brought drastic changes to human evolution, and not only in biology terms. As you can imagine, fire created heat. Okay, so the winters and the nights could have been warmer for the people. Fire also created light. So human settlements became more friendly and safer against climatic conditions or against other animals. In other words, fire improved the security and the comfort of human settlements, and these facts promoted the expansion of habitation. Habitation is the state of living somewhere specifically, the act of living in a specific spot, which was a totally new situation for early humans. Additionally, fire was also used for cooking, of course. The heat of burning wood, of burning biomass, could now be used to cook food. So food didn't have to be exclusively raw anymore. Food became more edible, probably more nutritious, and perhaps more pleasant for humans. A condition that could help human populations not only to retain, but also to grow further. So the mastery of fire, let's say more things about on this slide. The mastery of fire and the use of fire for cooking led eventually to the discovery of ovens. Ovens was another great invention of that period. Ovens were, of course, being used for cooking food, but they also kick off the first industrialized activities for humans, early industrialized activities. The first forms of metallurgy and pottery would not be possible without fire and ovens. So you see that fire assists various activities because due to fire, we had a lot of turning points for human evolution that eventually aid the emergence of a very early human civilization. To conclude about this second epoch, the epoch of fire. During this epoch of fire in the organic energy economies, what shifts, what changes can we see? First of all, we have an additional primary energy motor. Comparing to the first epoch of food, the primary energy motors are more diverse now. Along with humans and their somatic energy, we now have an extra energy motor, an extra somatic energy motor, fire. In the same way, the primary source of energy has been diversified. It is still biomass in the form of fresh plant and animals biomass, derived initially from the sun through photosynthesis, but we also have now biomass in the form of stems, of barks, or any other flammable enough part of plants. I could name it accumulated biomass that is generally named firewood. Okay. Note that firewood was there to stay, okay, as it became a major energy source for millennia, and it is still used in our days since these Paleolithic times. Let's talk now about the last epoch, the third epoch of the organic energy economies, the epoch of agriculture. another major turning point, another milestone for the human history. It's the epoch where humans are experiencing the agricultural revolution, or in other words, the Neolithic revolution, as it is also been said. We're about 12,000 years ago, and the planet is facing again great geological and climatic changes. It is the end of the last glacial period, and Earth is starting to defrost. There are a lot of theories about how that happened, but let's stick to the dominant one, which claims that due to a shift in Earth's orbit, more solar radiation were hitting the planet, and due to that, huge ice sheets melt in the north, fresh sweet water float in the Atlantic, ocean currents and winds change their direction, and finally, Earth temperature rise by 3.5 degrees of Celsius. So at the dawn of the Neolithic revolution, at the dawn of the agricultural revolution, we had a warmer planet, we had more humidity in the atmosphere, we had less frozen soil, that is more land to move and to use, and in general, we had better conditions for both plant and animals. As it happened with the mastery of fire, it is again impressive that agriculture developed more or less at the same period. And remember that we're talking about historical or even geological times in many different parts of the world, distant and isolated from each other. Paleoarchaeological research efforts can now recognize several centers of origin for agriculture, several agricultural hotspots, with the initial origin of agriculture to be found here in the Middle East, in an area called the Fertile Crescent, about 11,000 years ago. Then we have China with the Yangtze and Yellow River basins. Probably from China, we moved to New Guinea 9 to 6,000 years ago, but there is also the sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa, Ethiopia, and on a totally different part of the world, in Americas. We had agriculture in northern South America, in Amazonia and Andes, in Mesoamerica and Central Mexico, and in Eastern North America about 3,000 years ago. Please mention in this graph that the centers of origin are with the orange color, and with the lighter color are today's most agricultural areas of the modern world. You can see that in some occasions this area are matched, but in other occasions this area now have been abandoned and moved to different places or emerged as a new agricultural areas from the beginning, from the scratch. So humans started the cultivation of land. They grow vegetables and mainly cereals. In this way, they possess more energy. This is just a graph with the differences between the nomadic and the sedentary people, the differences that agricultural revolutions provoke, basic changes that agricultural revolution brought. First of all, you can see that the main shift was that we moved from a wandering human to a settled human. We as human species quit the nomadic state of hunters and gatherers and adopt a sedentary state, the sedentary state of breeder and growers. And in this table, you can see the main differences. For example, sedentary settled people inhabit the same locality throughout their lives. They have a permanent home. They are being fed through agriculture, whereas wandering people are hunting for their food. They often lived in infertile parts of the world where they were exposed to weather conditions, to extreme weather conditions. There are some wandering human civilizations still, but they are decreasing. So humans started the cultivation of land in this third epoch of agriculture. They grow vegetables and mainly cereals, and in this way possess more energy. Energy as biomass, again, in the form of food. More and better food supported more people and promoted the growth of human population. A lot of other major cultural and political changes can be seen during this epoch. For the first time, humans have food that they cannot consume immediately. For the first time, humans have excess of food, food that must be stored in warehouses for later use. And that fact was very important because it brought novel abilities to human societies, such as record keeping, counting, writing, in other words, the first forms of bureaucracy, or novel needs such as build suitable warehouses, secure and guard their food stocks, make weapons, or make even wars to get this stored food of other people. In other words, agricultural revolution brought the need for complex administrative structures, structures that were formed by religious, political, or military elites that form and affect all the aspects of individual and community life. So this third epoch, the epoch of agriculture, was dominant and central in energy systems for thousands of years. We can distinguish several periods in this third epoch. The thing is that all agrarian societies of this period, from the early Neolithic agricultural societies to the traditional agricultural societies just before the Industrial Revolution, were shared the same energetic foundations. So the primary source for the energy needs was still biomass. So the key was again sun and photosynthesis. These societies were technically fully renewable and sustainable in a way. They used the photosynthetic conversion of solar radiation to chemical energy to produce food for people and fodder for their animals, and then they reuse or recycle their waste for the fertilization of their land or as fuels for the metallurgy industry in order to make simple farm tools or weapons. I have said already that the biomass remain the primary source of energy during the epoch of agriculture. The difference is that this time, with the help of cultivated food and the domestic animals, biomass is more reliable. By farming, humans had access to a source of biomass energy that was more or less stable and predictable. That was a great improvement comparing with the nomadic energy system of the wandering humans that were preying the natural environment. It can be said that by farming with the agricultural revolution, humans got closer to a state of energy security, a very important issue when we talk about energy and a main issue until the current days. Another very important thing that happened during this epoch was the domestication of animals. Humans were now settled, and a more secure energy system, that is an energy system with more food to share and use, allow them to domesticate various animal species and start use them in farming, in constructions for their transportation or the transportation of goods, or even use them during wars. The first domesticated animals, big mammals in particular, such as oxen, donkeys, horses, or even elephants, were of course more effective than any man or woman. So the overall work capacity of the system was increased. You realize now that during the epoch of agriculture, another energy motor was added. We have a new energy motor. We had already humans and their muscles from the first epoch of food. Then we had fire from the second epoch of fire, and now we also have animals and their strength. And as you know, animals remain one of the primary energy motors throughout history, although at least in the Western or the first world, please put that in brackets, they have also disappeared from the label seen after the start of the modern industrialization less than 100 years ago. Animals still play an important role for many localized energy systems. I just said that during the epoch of agriculture, animals were added as an extra energy motor, and this addition increased the overall work capacity of the system. But let's take a closer look at this graph. We have here in the y-axis the shares of prime movers capacities through historical times, and in the x-axis we have the time in different civilizations realms. We have Egypt, ancient Rome, China, and Europe from 2000 before Common Era to the modern 1950s. You can see that throughout history, animal work capacity, this area here with this symbol, the horizontal lines, animal work capacity share increase, okay, but remain limited. Contrary, human energy motor, the human work capacity, the dotted part of the bars, although decreasing, okay, remained dominant until the Industrial Revolution, until the beginning of the 18th century. Why is that happening? Because animal exploitation has, of course, limits. Limits in energy harnessing from animals due to insufficient feeding, for example, or due to diseases. On the other hand, human energy motor share increased throughout history as humans, besides animal power, continuously embed new and better tools and technology to their work capacity. So humans became continuously more effective in this way, more and more effective until, of course, the emergence of the first steam or internal combustion machines. A lot of new technologies are credited to the first and to the later agrarian societies. Innovations such as the wheel, the plough, the water mills, or the mastery of air with the ability to sail, and the windmill have their origin to this epoch. These innovations promoted a more efficient use of labor, more efficient use of fuels and of animals. Indeed, the use of water and wind was the first examples of exploitation of a non-organic source of energy, a source with no biological basis, a source that was not provided through the function of photosynthesis. And this was the first time such a thing happened. So besides biomass that was improved through agriculture as an organic source of energy, we have also now two non-organic energy sources, water and wind. By mastering water and wind, humans could now perform several industrialized procedures, such as crushing seeds to produce flours or to produce vegetable or olive oil, They could smelt metals, processing timbers, and so on. I said before that the organic energy economies, concluding, were the longest energy system humans create, as it counts for more than 95% of human history. In fact, until the early modern period, just before the first industrial revolution, changes in the energy system were very, very slow, and energy sources were dominated by biomass in the form of food or fodder, and by firewood. Okay, so we had biomass and firewood for the 95% of our human history as the major energy sources. Yet, at the end of this period, at the end of the organic energy economies, three core conditions changed. Human population were continuously growing, the availability of land was decreasing, and the climatic conditions became unfavorable. So this energy system met somehow its limit, as it could not support it a further economic growth. This situation forced a new shift, this time not inside the model of organic energy economy, but to a different and new energy regime. It's the epoch of fossil fuels that we are going to discuss next. So now we are about to move to the second section of the webinar, to our next organizing energy system, the fossil fuel economy. Which are the fossil fuels? Suppose you all know it's the coal, okay, the crude oil and all its products, and of course it's the natural gas. The epoch of fossil fuels is the current energy paradigm. We live in a fossil fuel economy. As I said before, fossil fuels, the primary energy source of our days, uses fossil biomass that was formed from plants through complex geological and chemical procedures, biomass that is the product of the transformation of solar radiation to chemical energy during photosynthesis. Speaking on an energy basis, we cannot see many and dramatic changes by this shift, the shift from organic to the fossil fuel energy economy. This transition can be taken as just a replacement of the overground contemporary solar energy of the organic energy economy by an underground stored past solar energy of the fossil fuel economies. We are still depending on the sun in a way, but now we have also new additions to energy sources and motors. We are still using biomass, we are still using wood, but now we also have new energy sources and new energy motors. The new dominant primary energy source is the fossil fuels, the fossil fuels, and the new primary energy motor, the new prime movers, as we say, are the engines. We had biomass, human muscles, fire, we had wind and water so far, and at this point of history, we add fossil fuel engines. I said already that the previous energy system, the organic energy economy, met its limit as it could not sustain further economic development. So the intention here was to increase the productivity of labor force in order to fulfill the increasing demands for goods and services. This procedure has been supported and triggered by a series of sequential industrial revolutions. From the mechanizations of the late 16th century to the mass production systems of the second industrial revolution, then to the modern automation of the production during the 20th century, and finally today to today's networking and in the Internet of Things time. Sequential revolutions promoted this shift, and at the same time they were they were steps in an ongoing route of seeking a new energy paradigm. Let's see some of these steps in more detail. I will start with the first industrial revolution. We are at the end of the epoch of agriculture, at the end of the organic energy economies. The 16th century is ending. We need more and more energy to support our activities, and we discover coal. Not exactly discover coal, as we knew coal from centuries ago, but now we found out ways, we developed the proper technologies that allowed us to extract it from Earth on a massive manner. Why was that important? Because we added another energy source, the first fossil energy source in history that was much better than the previous one, the firewood. And of course, coal is more efficient comparing to firewood. It can give us more calories per ton than wood. It is more abundant and concentrated in specific areas, so it's easier to collect it. And of course, it is easier and cheaper to transport it between areas. A second important characteristic of this energy revolution is an invasion. New fuels are most of the time accompanied by technological innovation. And this time we had the invasion of the steam engine. Steam engines allowed us to transform, to convert chemical energy in the form of coal that produced heat to mechanical one in the form of motion by the kinetic parts of our production machineries. That was the first time in history that we had this possibility to get kinetic energy, to get motion from a chemical energy source, except maybe from the transformation of food, of biomass in our bodies or in other animals' bodies to movement. So the first industrial revolution very quickly started at about 1784. Two key facts, the mass extraction of coal and the invasion of steam engines, and we have the mechanization of production with a benchmark that is the first power loom as a result of this shift. All these changes, supported by coal and steam engines, forced people to migrate to big cities, to form big cities better, because there were no big cities since then. Cities were rapidly expanding, and urbanization was the new vital term, and for the period, and energy demands were increased. Big cities with high numbers of inhabitants needed more light, more heating, more transportations, more supplies to get in, and more products to get out from them. This increase in energy demands pushed the coal prices, and this new fuel was getting more and more expensive. Energy cost and prices were in total higher, and as it happens in situations like this, a new energy source should have been found, a shift in the energy system should have been sought. So what was this new alternative energy source? That was oil, petroleum, and petroleum byproducts that have been introduced and diversified the energy source mix of the period. Along with this new energy source mix, new technologies arise, the crude oil and natural gas refining technologies, and new engines like the internal combustion engines were invented. The new refining technologies made the coal less efficient, as comparing to it, crude oil and natural gas needed less labor to be extracted, and they were less expenses to be transported from one place to another. Additionally, the internal combustion engine could produce by far more work than the steam engines, and the combination of the two, the new fuel and the new engine, endorsed the mass production by allowing the creation of the assembly line, made transportations faster and cheaper, giving boost to the world trade, and made the creation of the promising chemical industry a reality. So to sum up, the second industrial revolution started at about 1870 the new refining technologies for oil, natural gas, along with the invasion of internal combustion engines are the key facts. The mass production, along with the electrification of the cities and of the production units, were the main results of that shift. So let's move now to the third section of our webinar. We have briefly, of course, discussed so far the main changes in the energy systems that supported humanity throughout history, from biomass and the somatic energy of humans to fire, from fire to firewood, and then to fossil fuels, to coal, oil, and natural gas. But what are these changes? They seem to be repeated, and they emerge whenever a dead end of the energy users is on the scene. So even the most well-used and efficient energy source that was very common and dominated the market and the energy mix for a long period of time can get to its limits. When that happens, it will eventually be challenged by another source, and finally it will be replaced by another major energy source. Shifts like this in the dominant energy source mix are long-term procedures that provoke structural changes in energy systems, and they are what we call energy transitions. These structural changes, of course, cannot be seen outside their social and political contexts, outside the social and political contexts of their time. They go along with the evolution of human history and societies, and without them, we wouldn't have seen the current development and progress of the human society. We would have a totally different kind of human civilization. Energy transitions bring along new energy sources, of course, but they also bring new technologies, new machineries, new habits, new social structures. So energy transitions brings with them new values and new meanings for the societies, and in this way they can be regarded as engines of cultural change, a mean for cultural progress in the sense of shifts for human societies. In general, we can say that an energy transition is occurring for the time period between the first introduction of the new fuel and until this new fuel can claim for 1/4 of a national energy market share. So it is referred to this period between the first introduction until a substantial 25% share of the national market. I said before that energy transitions are long-term structural changes, and usually they need a lot of time to occur. You can see, for example, in this graph, the time needed for a series of major energy sources in order to provide a significant share of the global energy mix. You can see here that coal needed 50 years to provide the 40% of the global energy supply, or here that crude oil needed the same time to provide the 30% of the global supply, or natural gas the same time, again 50 years to provide just the 20% of the global energy supply. In our current days, we are experiencing a phase of energy transition. We are in renewable energy sources epoch now, but it is too early to see their abilities. We are only on the 5% of the global energy supply by renewable sources. In the history of energy transitions, fast transitions considered an anomaly because they can occur only in limited areas, in areas with small populations, and usually are not repeatable and thus cannot be a new global energy paradigm. So today we're again on an energy transition period. We are seeking ways of shifting from the current unsustainable energy paradigm that uses fossil fuels to a sustainable energy system that would use renewable energy sources. So this energy transition is more focused on the environmental and societal consequences of energy use. Which are the main characteristics of an energy transition? Energy transition is a complex procedure that involves several aspects of political, economic, scientific, and social structures. These human-driven structures would provoke the necessary structural changes to the means of energy production and use. And these means are what we call energy paradigm, a term that I have used many times so far. An energy transition would have major impacts on, first of all, on the economic development of a country or to the global economy. It will affect the quality of life for the people, as it will cause changes in everyday activities of the people. It will alter the social structure of our societies, as a new group of people and new sections of economy would be benefit from it. And of course, it will affect the health of our ecosystems and our environment, depending on the impacts of the new energy sources. This is a map, a world map with an energy transition index, where we can see that different parts of the world are in different stages for that energy transition. The darker places are at about 90 to 100% of the transition. They considered high performance, but you can also see that major parts of the world are very limited in this effort. Energy transition are not monolithic procedures, okay? They are complex. They are the sum of multiple smaller transitions that interact with each other and eventually build the main components of an energy system. An energy transition will affect, first of all, the primary energy sources. As we see before, we moved from wood to coal, oil and natural gas to the fossil fuels, and now we're trying to move to renewable energy sources. It will affect the machineries and the technology that would lead the new energy system. The energy carriers, meaning the forms of energy that would originate from these new primary energy sources. And finally, an energy transition would affect the energy services in demand. It will give us new possibilities of using energies and would create new production and new consuming needs. You can see here in this graph the main drivers of an energy transitions. You can see the multiple smaller transitions that must occur in order to shift from an energy system to another. One driver is the availability and the competitiveness of the new source. We are also interested on the quality of the new machines and technology. Another driver is the energy policies and measures that have to be taken, and of course, the type and magnitude of the new energy services demand that would emerge. For a successful energy transition, four dimensions should be fulfilled. We are interested in four dimensions when we are talking about energy transition. The first one is that the new source, okay, the new energy paradigm should promote energy security, okay, for most of the people, most of the countries, most of the parts of the world. The second is that the new energy paradigm should be cheap, or at least cheaper than the previous one. So we are interested in energy cost. Also, it has to have the social acceptance of the people. Note here the use of nuclear power, for example, that it's okay, of course, it is effective in terms of energy efficient, but it's not social accepted in most parts of the world, or the use of wind power in massive industrialized windmill parks. Okay, and the fourth dimension is that, of course, the new energy paradigm should be more environmental friendly in order to cope the consequences of climate change. So let me sum up. We are ending this presentation. I will sum up the key facts that must occur in order of an energy transition to be successful. And for that, we can say that two things are very important. Firstly, the old source should have become scarce. So it's the scarcity of the old source that would make the old source more expensive and less satisfactory, and would trigger scientists, innovators, and entrepreneurs to study and to work on a different direction, and it would provoke eventually new innovations and alternatives. And secondly, the new source must be superior, must be better. So the superiority of the new source, when we're talking about energy, this superiority would improve the usability of energy and would convince producers to invest more and consumers to buy more. Most of the times, consumers would buy in higher prices, at least at the beginning. Of course, to convince someone to pay more for the same commodity, you have to offer a better, more usable, and more exciting alternative of it. Higher prices would promote more supply from the industry, and this would fulfill the economic cycle of the transition. So to close, I would now close the presentation with a third comment about important things on energy transitions. When we're talking about energy transitions, we should also discuss beyond technicalities. I said that energy transitions are also a way for social and cultural changes. So it's not only about how much energy we need, how expensive this energy is, but it is also about how we use energy and what for which purposes. Individual factors, personal habits, social conditions, community structures that affect our behaviors and our stance should also be a key component of any discussion about energy transition, of any discussion in our seeking of finding a new energy paradigm that would allow us to overcome this unsustainable energy system of burning fossil fuels. So that was all for this webinar. Thank you for your attending. If you have any comments or any questions, please use the chat or your microphone. Okay, so I will close this presentation now. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your comments. See you next time, perhaps on Thursday, in a new webinar with the title "Environmental Costs of Energy Use" on Thursday at 11 o'clock.